Continuing those extraordinary twins by Mark Twain. Both parties don't use it at the same time, do they? You bet they don't, said both old ladies in a breath. And moreover, said Aunt Betsy, the Freethinkers and the Baptist Bible class use the same rooms over the market house. But you can take my word for it, they don't mash up together and use it at the same time. Very well, said Angelo. You understand it now. And it stands to reason that the arrangement couldn't be improved. I'll prove it to you. If our legs tried to obey two wills, how could we ever get anywhere? I would start one way, Luigi would start another. At the same moment, the result would be a standstill, wouldn't it? As sure as you are born. Now ain't that wonderful? A body never would have thought of it. We should always be arguing and fussing and disputing over the merest trifles. We should lose worlds of time, for we couldn't go downstairs or up, couldn't go to bed, couldn't rise, couldn't wash, couldn't dress, couldn't stand up, couldn't sit down, couldn't even cross our legs, without calling a meeting first and explaining the case, and passing resolutions, and getting consent. It wouldn't ever do, now would it? Do? Why, it would wear a person out in a week. Did you ever hear anything like it, Patsy Cooper? Oh, you'll find there's more than one thing about them that ain't commonplace, said the widow, with the complacent air of a person with a property right and a novelty that is under admiring scrutiny. Well now, however do you manage it? I don't mind saying I'm suffering to know. He who made us, said Angelo reverently, and with us this difficulty also provided a way out of it. By a mysterious law of our being, each of us has utter and indisputable command of our body about a week at a time. Turn and turn about. Well, I never. Now, ain't that beautiful? Yes, is beautiful, and infinitely wise and just. The weekends, every Saturday at midnight, to the minute, to the second, to the last shade of a fraction of a second, infallibly, unerringly, and in that instant, the one brother's power over the body vanishes, and the other brother takes possession, asleep or awake. How marvelous are his ways, and past finding out. Luigi said, so exactly to the instant does the change come that during our stay in many of the great cities of the world, the public clocks were regulated by it, and as hundreds of thousands of private clocks and watches were set and corrected in accordance with the public clocks, we really furnished the standard time for the entire city. Don't tell me that he don't do miracles anymore. Blowing down the walls of Jericho with ram's horns wasn't as difficult, in my opinion. And that is not all, said Angelo. A thing that is even more marvelous, perhaps, is the fact that the change takes note of longitude and fits itself to the meridian we are on. Luigi is in command this week. Now, if on Saturday night, at a moment before midnight, if it's actually the middle point between sunset and sunrise, that would make the most sense if something like this were to occur. If on Saturday, at a moment before midnight, we could fly in an instant to a point 15 degrees west of here, he would hold possession of the power another hour, for the change observes local time and no other. Betsy Hale was deeply impressed and said with solemnity, Patsy Cooper, for detail, it lays over the passage of the Red Sea. Now, I shouldn't go as far as that, said Aunt Patsy, but if you've a mind to say Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm with you, Betsy Hale. I am agreeable then. Though, I do think I was right, and believe Parson Maltby would say the same. Now, there's another thing. Suppose one of you wants to borrow the legs a minute from the one that's got them. Could he let them? Yes, but we hardly ever do that. There were disagreeable results several times, and so we very seldom ask or grant the privilege nowadays, and we never even think of such a thing unless the case is extremely urgent. Besides, a week's possession at a time seems so little that we can't bear to spare a minute of it. People who have the use of their legs all the time never think of what a blessing it is, of course. It never occurs to them it is just their natural, ordinary condition, and so it does not excite them at all. But when I wake up on Sunday morning, and it's my week, and I feel the power all through me, oh, such a wave of exultation and thanksgiving goes surging over me, and I want to shout, I can walk, I can walk. Madame, do you ever at your uprising want to shout, I can walk, I can walk? I don't know. That's not going to go into a Disney sort of song, is it? No, you poor unfortunate creature, but I'll never get out of my bed again without doing it. Laws to think. I've had this unspeakable blessing all my long life and never had the grace to thank the good Lord that gave it to me. Tears stood in the eyes of both the old ladies, and the widow said softly, Betsy Hale, we have learned something, you and me. The conversation now drifted wide, but by and by floated back once more to that admired detail, the rigid and beautiful impartiality with which the possession of power had been distributed between the twins. Aunt Betsy saw in it a far finer justice than human law exhibits in related cases. She said, In my opinion, it ain't right now, and never has been right, the way a twin born a quarter of a minute sooner than the other one gets all the land and grandeurs and nobilities in the old countries, and his brother has to go bare and be a nobody. Which of you was born first? Angelo's head was resting against Luigi's. Weariness had overcome him, and for the past 5 minutes he had been peaceably sleeping. The old ladies had dropped their voices to a lulling drone to help him steal the rest. His brother wouldn't take him upstairs to get. Luigi listened a moment to Angelo's regular breathing, then said in a voice barely audible, We were both born at the same time, but I am 6 months older than he is. For the land's sake, shh, don't wake him. He wouldn't like my telling this. It has always been kept secret till now. But how in the world can it be, if you were born at the same time? How can one of you be older than the other? It is very simple, and I assure you, it is true. I was born with a full crop of hair. He was as bald as an egg for 6 months. I could walk 6 months before he could make a step. I finished teething 6 months ahead of him. I began to take solids 6 months before he left the breast. I began to talk 6 months before he could say a word. Last and absolutely unassailable proof, the sutures in my skull closed 6 months ahead of his. Always just that 6 months difference to the day. Was that accident? Nobody is going to claim that, I'm sure. It was ordained, it was law, it had its meaning. Now we know what that meaning was. Now, what does this overwhelming body of evidence establish? It establishes just one thing, and that thing it establishes beyond any peradventure whatever. Friends, we would not have it known for the world, and I must beg you to keep it strictly to yourselves, but the truth is we are no more twins than you are. The two old ladies were stunned, paralyzed, petrified, one may almost say, and could only sit and gaze vacantly at each other for some moments. Then Aunt Betsy Hale said impressively, There's no getting around proof like that. I do believe it's the most amazing thing I ever heard of. She sat silent a moment or two, and breathing hard with excitement, and then she looked up and surveyed the strangers steadfastly a little while and added, Well, it does beat me, and I would have took you for twins anywhere. So would I, said Aunt Patsy, with the emphasis of a certainty that is not impaired by any shade of doubt. What, are they going to say that it was the second pregnancy in the womb that attached itself to the first pregnancy? Guess that could have happened somewhere, but I mean, this is a fiction, but anybody in the world, I don't care who he is, said Aunt Betsy with decision. You won't tell, said Luigi appealingly. Oh dear, no, answered both ladies promptly. You can trust us, don't be afraid. That is good of you and kind. Never let on treat us always as if we were twins. You can depend on us. said Aunt Betsy. "But it won't be easy, because now that I know you ain't, you don't seem so." Luigi muttered to himself with satisfaction. "That swindle has gone through without the change of cars. It was not very kind to him to load the poor things up with a secret like that, which would be always flying to their tongues' ends every time they heard anyone speak of the strangers as twins, and would become harder and harder to hang on to with every recurrence of the temptation to tell it, while the torture of retaining it would increase with every new strain that was applied. But he never thought of that, and probably would not have worried much about it if he had. A visitor was announced, someone to see the twins. They withdrew to the parlor, and the two old ladies began to discuss with interest the strange things to which they had been listening to. When they had finished the matter to their satisfaction and Aunt Betsy rose to go, she stopped to ask a question. "How does things come on between Roweny and Tom Driscoll?" "Well, about the same. He writes tolerable often, and she answers tolerable seldom." "Where's he?" "In St. Louis, I believe, though he's such a gadabout that a body can't be very certain of him, I reckon." "Don't Roweny know?" "Oh, yes, like enough. I haven't asked her lately." "Do you know how him and the judge are getting along now?" "First rate, I believe. Miss Pratt says so, and being right in the house, and sister to the one and aunt to the other, of course she ought to know. She says the judge is real fond of him when he's away, but frets when he's around, and is vexed with his ways, and not sorry to have him go again, and has been gone 3 weeks this time. A pleasant thing for both of them, I reckon. Tom's rather harum-scarum, but there ain't anything bad in him, I guess. Oh no, he's just young, that's all. Still, 23 is old. In one way, a living man ought to be earning his living by that time. If Tom were doing that, or was even trying to do it, the judge would be a heap better satisfied with him. Tom's always going to begin, but somehow he can't seem to find just the opening he likes. Well now, it's partially the judge's own fault. Promising the boy his property wasn't the way to set him to earning a fortune of his own. But what do you think is? Roweny beginning to lean any toward him, or ain't she? Aunt Patsy had a secret in her bosom. She wanted to keep it there, but nature was too strong for her. She drew Aunt Betsy aside and said in her most confidential and mysterious manner, "Don't you breathe a syllable to a soul. I'm going to tell you something. In my opinion, Tom Driscoll's chances were considerable better yesterday than they are today." "Patsy Cooper, what do you mean?" "It's so as sure as you're born. I wish you could have been at breakfast and seen it for yourself." "You don't mean it." "Well, if I'm any judge, there's a leaning sure, my land." "Which one of them is it?" "I can't say for certain, but I think it is the youngest one, Angie." Then there were handshakings and congratulations and hopes and so on, and the old ladies parted perfectly happy, the one in knowing something which the rest of the town didn't, and the other in having been the sole person able to furnish that knowledge. The visitor who had called to see the twins was the Reverend Mr. Hotchkiss, pastor of the Baptist church. At the reception, Angelo told him that he had lately experienced a change in his religious views, and was now desirous of becoming a Baptist, and would immediately join Mr. Hotchkiss's church. There was no time to say more, and the brief talk ended at that point. The minister was much gratified, and had dropped in for a moment now, invited the twins to attend his Bible class at 8 that evening. Angelo accepted, and was expecting Luigi to decline, but he did not, because he knew that the Bible class and the free thinkers met in the same room, and he wanted to treat his brother to the embarrassment of being caught in free-thinking company. Say, Chapter 5. Guilt and Innocence Finally Blent. A long and vigorous quarrel follows between the twins, and there is plenty to quarrel about, for Angelo was always seeking truth, and this obliged him to change and improvise his religion with frequency, which wearied Luigi, and annoyed him too, for he had to be present at each new enlistment, which placed him in the false position of seeming to endorse and approve his brother's fickleness. Moreover, he had to go to Angelo's prohibition meetings, and he hated them. On the other hand, when it was his week to command the legs, he gave Angelo just cause of complaint, for he took him to circuses and horse races and fandangos, exposing him to all sorts of censure and criticism, And he drank too. Whatever he drank went to Angelo's head instead of his own, and made him act disgracefully. When the evening was come, the two attended the freethinkers' meeting, where Angelo was sad and silent. And then came the Bible class, looked on upon him coldly, finding him in such company. Then they went to Wilson's house, and chapter 11 of Pudd'nhead Wilson follows, which tells of the girl seen in Tom Driscoll's room, and closes with the kicking of Tom by Luigi at the anti-temperance mass meeting of the Sons of Liberty, with the additions of some account of Roxy's adventures as a chambermaid on a Mississippi boat. Her exchange of the children had been flippantly and farcically described in the earlier chapter. Next morning all the town was abuzz with great news. Pudd'nhead Wilson had a law case. The public astonishment was so great and the public curiosity so intense that when the justice of the peace opened his court, the place was packed with people, and even the windows were full. Everybody was flushed and perspiring. The summer heat was almost unendurable. Tom Driscoll had brought a charge of assault and battery against the twins. Robert Allen was retained by Driscoll, David Wilson by the defense, Tom, his native cheerfulness, unannihilated by his backbiting and bone-bruising passage across the mastheads of the Sons of Liberty the previous night, laughed his little customary laugh and said to Wilson, "I've kept my promise, you see. I'm throwing my business your way sooner than I was expecting to. It is very good of you, particularly if you mean to keep it up. Well, I can't tell you about that yet, but we'll see. If I find you deserve it, I'll take you under my protection, and I'll make your fame and fortune for you. I'll try to deserve it, Tom." A jury was sworn in. Then Mr. Allen said, "We will detain your honor but a moment with this case. It is not one where any doubt of the fact of the assault can enter in. These gentlemen, the accused, kicked my client at the market house last night. They kicked him with violence, with extraordinary violence, with even unprecedented violence, I may say, insomuch that he was lifted entirely off his feet and discharged into the midst of the audience. We can prove by this, by 400 witnesses. We shall call but 3. Mr. Harkness will take the stand." Mr. Harkness, being sworn, testified that he was chairman upon the occasion mentioned, that he was close at hand and saw the defendants in this action, kick the plaintiff into the air, and saw him descend among the audience. "Take the witness," said Allen. "Mr. Harkness," said Wilson, "you say you saw these gentlemen, my clients, kick the plaintiff. Are you sure? And please remember that you were under oath. Are you perfectly sure that you saw both of them kick him, or only one? Now be careful." A bewildered look began to spread itself over the witness's face. He hesitated, stammered, but got out nothing. His eye wandered to the twins and fixed themselves there with a vacant gaze. "Please answer, Mr. Harkness. You are keeping the court waiting. It is a very simple question." Counsel for the prosecution broke in with impatience. "Your Honor, the question is an irrelevant triviality. Necessarily, they both kicked him, for they have but the one pair of legs, and both are responsible for them," Wilson said sarcastically. "Will your Honor permit this new witness to be sworn? He seems to possess knowledge which can be of the utmost value just at this moment, knowledge which would at once dispose of what everyone must see is a very difficult question in this case. Brother Allen, will you take the stand?" "Go on with your case," said Allen, petulantly. The audience laughed and got a warning from the court. "Now, Mr. Harkness," said Wilson, insinuatingly, "we shall have to insist upon an answer to that question." Well, of course, I do not absolutely know, but in my opinion—" "Never mind your opinion, sir. Answer the question." Why, I can't answer it." "That will do, Mr. Harkness. Stand down." The audience tittered, and the discomfited witness retired in a state of great embarrassment. Mr. Wakeman took the stand and swore that he saw the twins kick the plaintiff off the platform. The defense took the witness. Mr. Wakeman, you have sworn that you saw these gentlemen kick the plaintiff. Do I understand you to swear you saw them both do it? Yes, sir, with decision. How do you know that both did it? Because I saw them do it. The audience laughed. I got another warning from the court. But by and what means do you know that both and not one did it? Well, in the first place, the insult was given to both of them equally, for they were called a pair of scissors. Of course, they would both want to resent it, and so... Wait, you're theorizing now. Stick to the facts, counsel. We'll attend to the arguments. Go on. Well, they both went over there. That I saw. Very good. Go on. And they both kicked him, I swear to it. Mr. Wakeman, was Count Luigi here, willing to join the Sons of Liberty last night? Yes, sir, he was. He did join, too, and drank a glass or two of whiskey, like a man. Was his brother willing to join? No, sir, he wasn't. He is a teetotaler, and was elected through a mistake. Was he given a glass of whiskey? Yes, sir, but of course that was another mistake, too, and not intentional. He wouldn't drink it. He set it down. A slight pause, then he added casually and quite simply, the plaintiff reached for it and hogged it. There was a fine outburst of laughter, but as the justice was caught out himself, his reprimand was not very vigorous. Mr. Allen jumped and exclaimed, I protest against these foolish irrelevancies. What do they have to do with the case? Wilson said, calm yourself, brother. It was only an experiment. Now, Mr. Wakeman, if one of these gentlemen chooses to join an association and the other doesn't, and if one of them enjoys whiskey and the other doesn't, but sets it aside and leaves it unprotected, titter from the audience, it seems to show that they have independent minds and tastes and preferences, and that one of them is able to approve of a thing at the very moment that the other heartily is disapproving of. Doesn't it seem to you? Certainly does. It's perfectly plain. Now, then, it might be, I only say it might be, that one of these brothers wanted to kick the plaintiff last night, and that the other didn't want that humiliating punishment inflicted upon him in that public way and before all those people. Isn't that possible? Of course it is. It's more than possible. I don't believe the blonde one would kick anybody. It was the other one that... Silence, shouted the plaintiff's counsel, and went on with an angry sentence which was lost in the wave of laughter that swept the house. That will do, Mr. Wakeman, said Wilson. You may stand down. The third witness was called. He had seen the twins kick the plaintiff. Mr. Wilson took the witness. Mr. Rogers, you say you saw these accused gentlemen kick the plaintiff? Yes, sir, both of them. Yes, sir, which one of them kicked first? Why, they both kicked him at the same time. Are you perfectly sure of that? Yes, sir. What makes you sure of it? Why, I stood right behind them and saw them do it. How many kicks were delivered? Only one. A two-men kick. The result should be two kicks, shouldn't it? Why, yes, as a rule. Then what do you think went with the other kick? Well, the fact is, I wasn't thinking of the two being necessary this time. What do you think now? Well, I'm sure I don't quite know what to think, but I reckon that one of them did half of the kick and the other one did the other half. Some of the crowd sung out. It's the first sane thing that any of them has said. The audience applied. The judge said, silence, or I will clear the court. Mr. Allen looked pleased, but Wilson did not seem disturbed. He said, Mr. Rogers, you have favored us with what you think and what you reckon, but as thinking and reckoning are not evidence, I will now give you a chance to come out with something positive, one way or the other, and I shall require you to produce it. I will ask the accused to stand up and repeat the phenomenal kick. Well, last night, twins stood up. Now, Mr. Rogers, please stand behind them. A voice? No, stand in front. Laughter silenced by the court. Another voice. No, give Tommy another heist. Laughter sharply rebuked by the court. Now then, Mr. Rogers, two kicks shall be delivered, one after the other, and I shall give you my word that at least one of the two shall be delivered by one of the twins alone, and without the slightest assistance from his brother. Watch sharply, for you have got to render a decision without any ifs and in it. Roger bent himself. Behind the twins, with his palms just above his knees, in the modern attitude of the catcher at a baseball match, and riveted his eyes upon the pair of legs in front of him. Are you ready, Mr. Rogers? Ready, sir. Kick. The kick was launched. Have you got that one classified, Mr. Rogers? Let me study a minute, sir. Take as much time as you please. Let me know when you are ready. For as much as a minute Rogers pondered with all the eyes and a breathless interest fastened upon him. Then he gave the word, "Ready, sir, kick." The kick that followed was an exact duplicate of the first one. Now then, Mr. Rogers, one of those kicks was an individual kick, not a mutual one. You will now state positively which was the mutual one. The witness said, with crestfallen look, "I've got to give it up. There ain't any man in the world that could tell the other from which, sir." "You still assert that last night's kick was a mutual kick?" "Indeed, I don't, sir." "That will do, Mr. Rogers. If my brother Allen desires to address the court, your honor, very well. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready to let the case be at once delivered into the hands of this intelligent jury without comment." Mr. Justice Robinson had been in the office only 2 months, and in that short time had not many cases to try, of course. He had no knowledge of laws and courts except what he had picked up since he came into office. And he was a sore trouble to the lawyers, for his rulings were pretty eccentric sometimes, and he stood by them with Roman simplicity and fortitude. But the people were satisfied well with him, for they saw that his intentions were always right, and he was entirely impartial, and that he usually made up in good sense what he lacked in technique, so to speak. He now perceived that there was likely to be a miscarriage of justice here, and he rose to the occasion. "Wait a moment, gentlemen," he said. "It is plain that an assault has been committed It is plain to anybody, but the way things are going, the guilty will certainly escape conviction. I cannot allow this. Now, well, why should the innocent be, But, Your Honor," said Wilson, interrupting him earnestly but respectfully, "you were deciding the case yourself, whereas the jury—" "Never mind the jury, Mr. Wilson. The jury will have a chance when there is a reasonable doubt for them to take hold of, which there isn't so far. There is no doubt whatever that an assault has been committed. The attempt to show that both of the accused committed it has failed. Are they both to escape justice on that account?" "Not in this court, if I can prevent it. It appears to have been a mistake to bring the charge against them as a corporation. Each should have been charged in his capacity as an individual, and—" "But, Your Honor," said Wilson, "in fairness to my clients, I must insist that inasmuch as the prosecution did not separate the— No wrong will be done your clients, sir. They will be protected, also the public, and the offended laws. Mr. Allen, you will amend your pleadings and put one of the accused on trial at a time." Wilson broke in, "But, Your Honor, this is wholly unprecedented." Well, Siamese twins are, "to imperil an accused person by arbitrarily altering and widening the charge against him in order to compass his conviction when the charge has originally brought promises to fail to convict is a thing unheard of before." "Unheard of where? In the courts of this or any other state?" The judge said with dignity, "I am not acquainted with the customs of other courts, and I am not concerned to know what they are. I am responsible for this court, and I cannot conscientiously allow my judgment to be warped and my judicial liberty hampered by trying to conform to the caprices of other courts, be they—" "But, Your Honor, the oldest and highest courts in Europe—" "This court is not run on the European plan, Mr. Wilson. It is not run on any plan but its own. It has a plan of its own, and that plan is to find justice for both state and accused, no matter what happens to be practice and custom in Europe or anywhere else." Great applause. Silence. "It has not been the custom of this court to imitate other courts. It has not been the custom of this court to take shelter behind the decision of other courts, and we will not begin now. We will do the best we can by the light that God has given us, and while this court continues to have his approval, it will remain indifferent to what the other organizations may think of it." And applause. Then, "Gentlemen, I must have order. Quiet yourselves. Mr. Allen, you will now proceed against the prisoners, one at a time. Go on with that case." Allen was not at his ease, however. After whispering a moment with his client and with one or two other people, he rose and said, "Your Honor, I find it to be reported, and believe that the accused are able to act independently in many ways, but that this independence does not extend to their legs, authority over their legs being vested exclusively in the one brother during a specific term of days, and then passing to the other brother for a like term, and so on, by regular alternation. I could call witnesses who would approve that the accused had revealed to them the existence of this extraordinary fact, and had also made known which of them was in possession of the legs yesterday, and this would of course indicate where the guilt of the assault belongs, but as this would be a mere hearsay evidence, these revelations not having been made under oath. Never mind about that, Mr. Allen, it may not be all hearsay. We shall see, it may at least help to put us on the right track. Call the witnesses. Then I will call Mr. John Buckstone, who is now present. I beg that Miss Patsy Cooper may be sent for. Take the stand, Mr. Buckstone. Buckstone took the oath, and then testified that on the previous evening the Count Angelo Capello had protested against going to the hall, and had called all present to witness that he was going by compulsion and would not go if he could help himself. Also that Count Luigi had replied sharply that he would go just the same, and that he, Count Luigi, would see that to himself. Also that upon Count Angelo's complaining about being kept on his legs so long, Count Luigi retorted with apparent surprise, "Your legs? I like your impudence." "Now we are getting at the kernel of the thing," observed the judge, with grave and earnest satisfaction. "It looks as if the Count Luigi was in possession of the battery at the time of the assault." Nothing further was elicited from Mr. Buckstone. On direct examination, Mr. Wilson took the witness. "Mr. Buckstone, about what time was it that conversation took place?" "Toward 9 yesterday evening, sir." "Did you then proceed directly to the hall?" "Yes, sir." "How long did it take you to go there?" "Well, we walked, and as it was from the extreme edge of the town, and there was no hurry, I judge it took us about 20 minutes, maybe a trifle more." "About what hour was the kick delivered?" "About 13 minutes and a half to 10. "Admirable. You are a pattern witness, Mr. Buckstone. How did you happen to look at your watch in that particular moment?" "I always do it when I see an assault. It is likely I shall be called as a witness, and it is a good point to have. It would be well if others were as thoughtful. Was anything said between the conversation at my house and the assault upon the detail which we are now examining into?" "No, sir. The power over the mutual legs was in the possession of one brother at 9, and passed into the possession of another one during the next 30 or 40 minutes. Do you think you could have detected the change?" "By no means." "That is all, Mr. Buckstone." Miss Patsy Cooper was called. The crowd made way for her, and she came smiling and bowing through the narrow human lane, with Betsy Hale as escort and support, smiling and bowing in her wake, the audience breaking into the welcoming cheers, and old favorites filed along. The judge did not check this kindly demonstration of homage and affection, but let it run its course unrebuked. The old ladies stopped and shook hands with the twins with effusion, then gave the judge a friendly nod and hustled into the seats provided for them. They immediately began to deliver a volley of eager questions at the friends around them. "What is this thing for?" "What is that thing for?" "Who is that young man that is writing at the desk?" "Why, I declare it's Jack Bunce. I thought he was sick. Which is the jury?" "Why, is that the jury? Billy Prince and Jub Turner and Jack Lunsbury, and I never. Now who would ever a thought?" And they were gently called to order at this point, and asked not to talk in court. Their tongues fell silent, but the radiant interest in their faces remained, and their gratitude for the blessing of a new sensation and a novel experience still beamed undimmed from their eyes. Aunt Patsy stood up and took the oath, and Mr. Allen explained the point in issue, and asked her to go on now, in her own way, and throw as much light upon it as she could. She toyed with her reticule a moment or two, and as if considering where to begin, then she said, "Well, the way of it is this. They are Luigi's legs a week at a time, and then they are Angelo's, and then he can do whatever he wants to do with them." "You're making a mistake, Aunt Patsy Cooper," said the judge. "You shouldn't state that as a fact because you don't know it to be a fact." "What's the reason I don't?" said Aunt Patsy, bridling a little. "What is the reason that you do know it?" "The best in the world, because they told me." "That isn't a reason." "Well, for the land's sake, Betsy Hale, do you hear that?" "Hear it? I should think so," said Aunt Betsy, rising and facing the court. Why, Judge, I was there and I heard it myself. Luigi says to Angelo, no. It was Angelo said it to... Come, Miss Hale. Pray sit down, and certainly it's all right. I'm going to sit down presently, but not until I've... But you must sit down. Must? Well, upon my words, if things ain't getting to a pretty pass when... The house broke into laughter when it was promptly brought to order. In the meantime, Mr. Allen persuaded the old lady to take her seat. Aunt Patsy continued, yes, they told me that, and I know it's true. They're Luigi's legs this week. But I guess that's where one stops. But yeah, that would be a challenge. And if it came to such a point where you'd have to execute a Siamese twins, it's like, well, that's going to kill the other one. So, yeah. But we have this idea that, well, as long as we catch the guilty, let's throw some innocent people in there too. That needs to stop.